Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Consent Dojo, a monthly program that I host in order to do a deep dive conversation around the complex, necessary, and even sexy topic of consent, and not just around sex, sexuality, and kink, but in one's everyday life. So expanding the concept of it. And why do I call it a consent dojo? Because this is something that no one knows how to do naturally. And we need practice and building our consent muscles. So we do that. And I am here as a facilitator. I am not the expert. Long time ago when I started this, the previous season sponsor, because it's sponsored by different companies every quarter, asked me to teach. And then I thought, well, yes, I do teach about consent in the scope of my work, but this is such a broad topic that instead of me being the expert, I would like to be a learner. And as such, I hunt down brilliant, talented individuals with unique perspectives on the matter of consent and living with joy and living to our fullest. Please check out previous episodes where we talk about everything from organizational party decision making to the law to consent and art, as well as what to do when we, well, fuck up. And by the way, we will be swearing. Okay, so I want to welcome our lovely guest, Lee, and I am going to, I know Lee through the Sexual Health Alliance, which is a fantastic progressive organization that teaches helping professionals, not just therapists, including therapists, counselors, and educators, but any helping professionals, as well as helping not professionals, because you may be doing grassroots peer support to educate people, as well as to give certification for ASEC certification. ASEC is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And I will be asking questions as a proxy for all your viewers. And thank you for being here, viewers. And thank you, Lee. I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And who am I? What do I do? That's a big question. Could answer that for a long time, but I'll keep it short. So my name is Lee. I'm Dr. Ley David Elliette Cray. A lot of people call me Ley, but that's incorrect. I just spell my name wrong. My pronouns are she and they. She is right. They isn't wrong. And if you call me he, you're a coward. Uh, that's kind of how that works. Um, what am I? So I am a former philosophy professor. I'm one of those people who got tenure, got tired of the higher ed system and told them to kick rocks, where I then moved into working sort of on the national level in LGBTQI plus affirming mental health care. On the side, I've been working with the Sexual Health Alliance, and I want to second all of the things you said about them. Wonderful organization. To get my certification as a sexuality counselor. On top of that, I am a trauma-informed yoga instructor and mindfulness instructor specializing in work with queer and trans populations. I am a certified philosophical consultant, which a lot of people don't know about, but it's basically kind of like, right? It's basically kind of like CBT, like the cognitive behavioral therapy kind, but for non-clinical contexts. So not mental disorders, but more like existential crises. And my latest passion is I'm getting certified as a therapeutic game master so that I can explore things with people through Dungeons and Dragons, which is like doing so much good work for my inner child. Yeah, I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I've lived a lot of places, but this one's my favorite so far. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm sure I left stuff out, but it'll come out as we talk.
In terms of how you specifically work with people, because there are maybe viewers who
Oh
are
yeah.
interested. Yeah.
I forgot to mention the biggest thing. I have a coaching practice. Thank you for reminding me that. Yeah, I have a practice called Transentience Coaching. Isn't that the best name ever? Transentience is, oh, it came to me while I was driving through Dallas one day. So yeah, that is a sort of, I like to think of it as a radical, sex positive, kink informed, ENM informed, queer centered, sex worker friendly coaching practice that I aim to make accessible and adaptable to the people I'm actually working with. So I reach into the whole grab bag of tricks that I mentioned earlier and to kind of customize what would be the best plan for the client that I'm working with. So yeah, that's an important thing to remember. If you want to check out my stuff, there's that link in the chat. It's just at transcentiencecoaching.com, and same on Instagram.
I'm assuming this is virtual,
All virtual, yeah.
so people from anywhere. All right, well, let's get into the topic that I'm really fascinated with,
Mhm.
and I became aware of your presentation on this through the Sexual Health Alliance. So consent and solo play.
Mhm.
Consent and solo play, and play in this case, not D&D, but
Nope.
we're talking about sex and kink. By the way,
Yeah.
the D&D thing, you and I need to talk, because I've taken the alignment chart and transposed it into femdom desire and created a whole class around it.
Oh, I want to take that class.
We'll talk.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually also got a book in the works on BDSM as a form of gameplay. So taking a gameplay analysis toward it. So yeah, we should talk about all that. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
so
Mhm.
solo play. Yeah, it's a big part of my life. And it's something I engage in frequently, and I love to see other people engage in too. Because, so I'm fortunate enough to have lived around dungeons for the last many, many years, right? And after I do like solo play in a space like that, I oftentimes have people coming up to me and being like, that was so cool. I've never seen anyone do that. I want to do that, but I'm afraid. I don't have the nerve to do that. Right. So it turned into me like diving into like, what is going on? What is the appeal of this? What are the reasons? What's kind of the philosophy behind it? Turned into a class, which I taught a few times, and then that's how I ended up here. Um, I like to say that my reasons for getting into solo play were kind of three, and I think they're pretty universal reasons. One is a lack of available partners. So whether you're just living somewhere where there are no people, or whether your partners are out of town, your most consistent, most reliable, always there for you play partner is you. Right? So it's convenient. It's also a really great modality for self-discovery, for really learning about, we talk about edge play. Solo play can be a good place to really safely approach those edges. And explore, and also trying out new kinks, right? So a lot of times with kinks, there's a learning curve, and that learning curve can be risky depending on the tools you're using. So like one of my recent kinks that I've been exploring is inkless tattooing as a form of sensation play. I wanted to, of course, try that on me like a lot before I ever tried it out on another person, because you could hurt someone in unintended ways, right? So I wanted to try that on me. So yeah, lack of partners, self-discovery, and trying new kinks. These are really good reasons to do this kind of solo play. And it's got benefits. Yes, please.
Okay, so first, can you elaborate for us about what edge play is?
Yeah,
And this is edge play as opposed to playing with things with edges like knives, right?
yes.
How do you mean edge play?
Yes, though playing with things with edges can be a form of edge play in this sense. I got a bone saw right over there. But so edge play. you'll hear Kinksters talk about this quite a bit. It's playing with your edges, playing at your limits. It's kind of pushing up against something and maybe sticking your toe over the edge. And also you're playing at the edges of safety, right? So knife play, certain kinds of electro play, fire play. These things are edge play because there's a higher level of risk. Rope, right? The wisdom that I have internalized from my experience is that rope is always edge play, because it's potentially quite dangerous if you're not really sure what you're doing, right? And even dangerous if you are sometimes. But, you know, one of the things I always like to add with edge play is something that I got from my yoga teacher training. Because when you're doing yoga, instructors will oftentimes talk about playing with your edges too. When you're in a pose, maybe on the inhale, you'll come out a little bit, or on the exhale, you'll lean a little bit more, or vice versa. But I got to thinking, and really, like when we're talking about edge play, we should talk about two edges. There's the edge past which you start to feel a little bit of discomfort that's conducive to growth. And then there's that next edge where past it, you risk unintentional injury, right? And I think it's that space between those edges where kind of the best edge play, or most effective, depending on your goals, edge play can happen, where you're pushing past that first edge, but being mindful about getting too close to the second edge. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I wanted elaboration on what edge play was. Now, does solo play always have to do with edge play?
No, so you can do solo play and pretty much, with any degree of risk, or really with any kind of implement, whether it's got edges or fire or anything like that or not, right? You could, in theory, do a solo scene in your head as you're walking down the street, if you were conceptual enough, But I think it might be helpful to lay out 3 different kinds of solo play. So sometimes when we get a new toy and we want to like try it out, we do what we might call labbing with someone. Like, hey, I got this new flogger. Do you want to lab together so I can like test out the weight? Or I got this conductive rope. Can we do a lab together? And I see labbing as, whether it's solo or not, it's practicing, it's experimenting with your practice to try on skill sets, right? So whether it's partnered or solo, that's how I'm thinking of labbing. Play, I think of, is something that you're doing for the experience and the sensation and the mindset of the activity, right? So when I'm doing inkless tattooing on my leg, just to learn my implement, labbing. But when I'm doing it for the feel on my leg, or for the feel of doing that to my leg, which is different, that's more play. Right? Now, play and scene, I see as being on a spectrum, right? Or maybe like a Venn diagram where play is the bigger one and scene is a smaller circle. So a scene I think of as sort of intentionally structured play. Maybe with like with pre-planning, with more extensive negotiation, right? So on the less structured, more casual end, we have play. On the more structured, more narrative end, we have scene. And solo stuff can fall anywhere on them. Now, from an outside perspective, if you walk in the room and you see me sitting there, I don't know, hitting my back with a ball chain flogger, you might not be able to tell whether I'm labbing, playing, or scening. Because from the outside, they can look indistinguishable. It's a matter of internal framing. It's a matter of intention and how we're intending and conceiving of the experience we're having.
Okay, so 3 different types. So we've got labbing, play, and scene.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to jump right into the meat of the matter.
Let's do it.
If you're playing with yourself, quite literally playing with yourself,
Mhm.
as well as a metaphorical playing with yourself, and it is the self. Why is consent necessary? If I want to, haven't I already consented to this?
Yeah. So a want and a consent, I think, are different. Right? I can have a desire for things that I would not consent to. I could consent to things that I don't desire. Right. So I think those come apart. Desire is an attitude of craving, in a sense, whereas consent is an agreement. Right? It's a commitment. And when we think about those things, we tend to think of interpersonal relations. It can be really helpful to think about them intrapersonally, internally, thinking about yourself. Right? When you make a promise to yourself, when you make a commitment to yourself, even when you set an intention, these are all intrapersonal things. Now, do we have to adopt a sort of self-consent framework in things that we do? Not necessarily. I'm sure many people lead fantastic lives without ever thinking about that. But I think it can be enriching. It can be conducive to well-being and self-respect when you start really taking into account and checking in with yourself, listening to your thoughts, listening to your body, asking, I want this, but do I want to let myself have this? Do I want to let myself do this to me? So there's a reflective element to it, and there's a sort of self-affirming element to it that I think is really, really powerful for building self-respect, agency, authenticity, self-determination.
What's coming to me
Mm-hmm.
is the committing to something with self.
Yeah.
Creates that transitional space of, I am consciously doing this,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to behaving upon compulsion or
Yes.
habit.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, it would also be contributing to being mindful as well as being present. And since mindfulness and being present is such a trendy buzzword, and yet I don't think we break it out enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of, so I often make comparison between food, kink, and sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a bag of really delicious ginger snap cookies upstairs. It's very good. Last night, I stumbled up, went to the bathroom, had a glass of water, and just reached for it and ate it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really think about it. And this morning, I kind of felt bad about it.
Yeah.
Did I really need that sugar? And it was tasty. I really was more thirsty than hungry. So I
Mm-hmm.
was acting upon some sort of compulsion. Whereas right before meeting with you, I had a tasty dinner, then had a cup of tea and had a lovely cookie.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow it tasted better
Aha.
as opposed to the midnight cookie was I was like half eating and kind of like wandering around half asleep and had to like shove it in my face.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
would that be a good example?
I love that. Yes. Um, Sometimes, so I'll compare that to an experience that I had recently. So I was in a kink space and moving out of town. It was my last night. It was a send-off. And I was doing a scene with someone else, scene in the same sense I discussed earlier. Um, and at the end of it, I thought, I want to do a solo scene right now. I had that, like, I was like, I need to do this. And I had to tell myself, no, this is a desire. This is like a craving that you're having right now, but you are not in a headspace. You did not plan this. This could be dangerous for you. All right. Because, one of the rules of kink that I've adopted is that when I negotiate a scene with someone and sort of determine what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, come up with the script, the narrative, we can take things off the table, but we're not adding anything on once we start, because your ability to consent as you drop into these headspaces can get compromised. Yeah. And that happens with yourself too. You know, there can be times where you're wanting to flog or do wax play or inkless tattooing, whatever, on yourself, but you just know this would be coming from an unhealthy place rather than a healthy place. And that's when it can turn more into a form of impulsive desire satisfaction that resembles or just is self-harm rather than a healthy solo play practice. Does that make sense?
I'd like for you to elaborate further on healthy solo play and self-harm, because conventional therapeutic professionals would pretty immediately see any sort of intense sensation or self-play as necessarily being self-harm. I mean, never mind old mental health attitudes around BDSM in general, but
You mean the ones that completely ignore all of the research?
right. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I have had this talk with numerous mental health professionals who have been like, wait, no, this is self-harm. And it's like, well, let's get a little more subtle than that. So yeah, I'd love to talk more about that. So, you know, there's this idea that some people have that BDSM is always abusive, you know, because you're hitting someone. If that's the shape it's taking, right? BDSM's bigger than that. But there's a difference between abuse and consensual like impact on someone, right? And that difference is the consent, and not just the consent, but the mindset that makes the consent possible. You know, the whole freely given, informed sort of thing, right? Being in that mind space is what separates certain activities in coupled situations from abuse. And it's the same thing with solo play. So I think for me, if I'm going into some solo play without checking in with myself about what I want to do and kind of planning it and setting up appropriate safety measures and making sure that I have an aftercare plan to help me come down and thinking about my next day, like, do I have to work early in the morning? Am I going to be able to do that? If I'm not planning any of that, that's more risk-taking behavior of a potentially unhealthy sort. Right? If I'm engaging in solo play for the purpose of punishing myself, or for the purpose of pushing something further down, for the purpose of escaping or avoidance, I think that's when it starts to get towards self-harm. Because what is a harm? A harm is something that frustrates our interests. And I don't mean interests like I'm interested in this book series over here. I mean, like, what is in our interest, right? Our well-being. So the same action, if I go into it wanting to push stuff down, I'm using it as avoidance. That is very different from if I take that action with this mindset of, I'm going to use this to bring things closer so I can process them. I'm going to use this not to avoid, but to face. I'm going to use this in order to not punish, but to ground and process, right? And ground not in the sense of what you do with your teenagers, but ground in the sense of, you know, hippie stuff, right? Yeah, so I think that is one of those lines, you know, when you have the intention, when you've deliberately constructed the solo play, and you're engaging in what we could call auto-sadism or auto-masochism, which, you know, auto, self, it's self, you know, the enjoying of inflicting pain and receiving pain by the self, right? It's really the intention and the framing that separates it from self-harm. Is this something that is conducive to my interests, or is this something that is going to frustrate my interests?
I like that distinction. Frustrate or get in the way of our own interest.
Yeah.
So sensation play is something that a lot of people, mental health professionals as well as general public, get a little squeaky about. Like, causing pain to oneself is necessarily bad. To which I say, well, what about my foam roller?
Mhm.
Because oh my God, foam rolling on my IT band, I am screaming. It
Mhm.
hurts. I have an IT band like steel. And then somehow nobody ever tells me that I'm doing self-harm. And
Yeah.
it hurts more than a lot of kink practice. Ugh.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I've had some massages that were agonizing, but I don't think that person was, it wasn't battery. It was something that I conceive of as feeling good, because it loosened me up. Right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm going to go back to the self-consent,
Yeah.
right? So we
Mhm.
talked about harm being getting in the way of our own interest. Oh, also, we've been talking about some pretty serious things like grounding as well as facing challenges. But can self-play also just be for the fun of it, like skipping
Absolutely.
rope?
Yes. So, this is, I think one of the titles of this event was Solo Play as Self-Care, right? So
Mhm.
whenever I talk about self-care, I like to break it in two, because I think a lot of people confuse two different, very different phenomena as self-care. So let's say you break your leg. You're going to need probably to go to physical therapy. But physical therapy is difficult. It's sometimes grueling. It's not, let's call it what it is. It's work, right? But you're also going to need rest. You're going to need downtime. You're going to need to kind of spoil yourself a little bit, because if you spend too much time up on that leg, you're going to re-injure it. So I think self-care really divides into self-work and whatever the other one is. I can only think of calling it self-care. I can't think of a better name. So I either need a better
Restoration,
restoration, yeah, or even just not just because.
recovery.
So I also want a word that includes like things that aren't reparative,
Uh-huh.
you know, but are kind of like, you're not doing it to make yourself better. It's not laborious, it's play,
Mhm.
right? So, you break your leg, physical therapy is going to be necessary. This rest is going to be necessary. If you only have one and not the other, your healing process might get a little bit mucked up. I think a lot of, especially in contemporary American culture, we think of self-care, and really what we think of is self-work. We're like, I need to do this. My self-care is going to the gym and reading 10 books and making myself the best person I can be. That's exhausting. You're going to burn yourself out, right? But with that distinction on the table, I think solo play could be anywhere on the spectrum. You could do it as a way to process, as a way to bring things up, like we were talking about earlier. You can use it, and I want to be careful here, therapeutically. It's not therapy,
Mhm.
right? But not everything that's therapy, well, not everything that's therapeutic is therapy, right? Just like not everyone who's athletic is an athlete, right? But you can also use it just for recreation, for that genuine self-care, that self-play. You can do it because it's fun. You can do it because instead of it helping you process or confront or ground, you can do it because it feels nice and it's cool.
So rest and recreation, as somebody said in the sidebar.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so self-consent.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm gonna devil's advocate here.
Bring it.
How can how could I possibly violate my own consent?
Yeah. So sometimes we're not honest with ourselves. Sometimes we tell ourselves we want something when we don't. And that can create both like a sort of cognitive dissonance and discomfort. Depending on how extreme it gets, that cognitive dissonance can even turn into a form of like internal psychological or moral injury. Being aligned, having your actions, your self-directed actions in line with your self-directed desires, mindfully and intentionally, not accidentally, but cultivating that, that's a part of authenticity. That's a part of congruence. And I think those are things that are really, really a part of flourishing. When we ignore those, then we're working contrary to that flourishing. We're getting further away from congruence, further away from authenticity. We're leaning more into cognitive dissonance. And we can also do things that get us hurt. You know, that night that I mentioned earlier where I really wanted to do a solo scene, I'm glad I didn't, because I was in a headspace where I would have gone way too hard on myself. I would have incurred the kind of injuries that I didn't want. Right? So there's not just this sort of deep philosophical, not conducive to flourishing thing, but also you can really hurt yourself.
I want to ask your personal experiences.
Yeah.
And speaking of consent, please tell me when we need to skip it and move on.
Oh, yeah.
Have you had situations where in hindsight you realize you disrespected your own consent?
There have been situations where yes, I'll give you 3 examples. 1, so we want to negotiate these scenes, right? Now negotiation solo is a little different because there still actually are 2 parties. There's the person doing the planning, and then there's the person doing the scene. There's present you and there's future you, right? So the negotiation is dialogue there, right? It's a monologue, also a dialogue. It can be both, right? There have been times where I went off script and I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I sort of renegotiated mid-scene and I was like, I'm going to do this and it's going to be great. And I ended up doing things I didn't really want to do. And you know what made me do them? I can admit this, I was in public. I got out of my own head and I got into the space as a performer rather than this internal thing. And I started thinking, it would really wow the other people in this dungeon if I did this weird thing. That's very different from this sort of inward directed solo play, right? Performing is fine, but I didn't start that night wanting to do a performance. So I pushed myself for reasons that were coming from outside of me in a manner that I regretted the next day. Right. That one was a big one that comes to mind. I think I said 3, and I think that one actually encapsulated like all 3 of them.
Yeah, that feeling of this wasn't in my best interest. I feel bad the next day. I feel guilty. Now, the guilt part, though, is interesting. How do we disentangle guilt of feeling bad because we were working against our own interest versus internalized cultural taboo?
Yeah, and you know, that's actually something that you can incorporate into your solo scening of like part of your aftercare or even an extended part of the scene could be sitting with that guilt reflectively. You know, you've got it and you can wonder, like, check in with yourself. Am I feeling guilty? Or am I feeling like I should feel guilty? And that feeling is registering as guilt. Right? And I think it won't be pleasant to sit with that, but it would be an opportunity to. It would be the kind of unpleasantness that goes past that first edge, makes us a little uncomfortable, takes us to that place where growth happens.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I'm not a frequent solo player. In fact, it's pretty rare. So one of my reference point would be in violating my own consent.
Mhm,
Uh, and this is in partnered play.
mhm.
That's the thing that comes up for me. And for folks who are topping, when topping, there's this idea that also, how can I violate my own consent? I'm the one topping. So I think it's very similar, right? I'm the one topping, I'm the one making the decision. How can I violate my own consent? And I have done this, and I've learned the lesson the hard way, which is that playing when I know I'm too tired, or
Yeah,
playing when I feel like I'm obligated because we negotiated and somehow it would not be nice for me to say, I just don't have the juice.
yeah,
I am without spoons. Or playing when everything in my gut is like, this is a bad situation. This is not a good negotiation. You don't have, I don't have clarity in myself. I don't have clarity in the other. And I will end up not necessarily guilt, but I will feel depleted and full of doubt.
yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a pretty icky feeling.
It is, yeah.
Hmm.
Like, and one other one that comes to mind, as you're saying that is, you know, have you ever played with someone who like doesn't know when to call yellow, but
Hmm.
they should? As a top, we can experience that too. Like tops can call yellow, tops can be like, this is getting further than I want. And if you know you should and you don't, that is also a kind of violation of your own consent, right? Because there's that sort of dissonant ambivalence that you've got there where you're like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway, right? And not just I don't want to, but something in me is telling me that I shouldn't. Right? Now, safe words are an interesting topic in solo play
Hmm.
because it's not like you're just going to sit there and say green, green, yellow. You could, but I do think they're important. And I think safe words can be incorporated into solo play in two ways. Um, One is if you're in a space where there are other people, like there's a difference between when I solo play on my table right here versus when I do it at a play party or at a dungeon, right? I always get a spotter, and that spotter has permission to safe word my scene in certain ways. Um, they can call red on my scene if, let's say there's a fight breaking out next to me and I can't see it because I am involved in, I've got a blindfold on myself, right? That person, my spotter, can red my scene for my safety. There might also be certain conditions that we lay out where the conditions count as safe words. So part of my negotiations could be, I'm going to play, but no blood. If I start bleeding, scene is over. So that condition becomes the safe word. Right? So as soon as I see blood, it's like, okay, yeah, that's the end of my scene. I committed to myself that I would not play past that. That is calling of red. You can also explain those conditions to your spotter. So let's say I see that I'm bleeding, or the spotter sees that I'm bleeding, but I don't. They can red my scene. Yeah. I also use purple, which is a safe word that I made up. Um, so sometimes in BDSM communities, we adopt people who are under our protection. So there have been people that I would sort of take out for a night. Maybe they're just exploring the community. And, newbies in certain spaces can draw a lot of attention, and they might not be savvy to figure out how to navigate some of these situations. And if I'm doing a solo scene, they can come over in purple to be like, I'm in trouble. And then I know, okay, my thing is going to be paused. I need to come and help you out.
Oh, I like that.
Mm.
Yeah, and spotter. I like the spotter phrase works because you go to the gym and have
Yeah,
a barbell and got a spotter.
yeah. And spotters are really helpful with aftercare too.
I was
So,
about to ask that. In fact, I have a little scribble here that says
ooh, yeah.
aftercare.
Yeah.
Um, aftercare. Okay,
Mhm.
for those of you who are watching now, some of you who are regular have heard me talk about aftercare. Lee, this is my definition of aftercare: is that which each individual requires to regain equilibrium, and that it may be different. It's likely different from individual to individual and scene to scene, and it is optimal if there's some pre-planning of it. Now, aftercare, consent, and solo play.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Aftercare, I'm a big fan of aftercare. You know, I need my water, I need my stuffy, which is a Chucky doll, and I need to lay down. Um, but when you're doing a solo scene, um, it can be really easy to just like ride the high after you're done and keep going, or to just collapse and into not moving and not doing the things that you had promised yourself you would provide for you. Or if you're in public, you can attract a lot of attention. So I like to do sonic torture scenes where I have a guitar effects processor that is looped through itself and then plugged into headphones, and then a microphone duct taped to my throat so that anytime I make a sound in reaction to anything I'm doing, it's put through the processor infinitely and creates sonic chaos to kind of, yeah, it's really fun. It draws a lot of attention so that the moment I'm done with my scene, people are like, what is that? What are you doing? What is that? Or people come over and they're like, hey, can I use the table? Can I use the table? Are you done? And I don't like conflict. Yeah, exactly. So I will be like, yeah, cool. I'll answer the questions. And then the next day I drop because I never got my aftercare. Mhm. So I always now, if I'm playing in public at a party or anywhere else, I have a spotter so that when I'm done, that spotter can stand there and be like, she's doing aftercare. Please give some space. She'll answer your questions later. Right?
Thou
I've also,
shalt not pass.
yeah, exactly. And the spotter is also helpful because since solo playing is less common, some people think that all you're doing is labbing, with, you know, we talked about earlier. So they'll walk up and be like, hey, what is that you're doing? And it's like, honey, I'm busy. 5 paces. Um, I see this a lot with people who self-tie. Like people will come up and just want to have a conversation. Like, but it's like, no, I'm doing more than labbing. I'm scening. Give me space. So that's a little bit of etiquette. Whenever you see someone in public, if you're not sure whether they're solo labbing, solo playing, or solo scening, assume it's a scene until you see them talking to other people. Because even if they look done, what they're doing might be part of their aftercare, right? But just always best bet is to assume that it's a scene. And if they look fine, they're talking to people while they're doing it, that's some evidence that it's really labbing and you can go up and ask.
I have had, was it a solo play? It was so many years ago, but I
Yeah.
distinctly remember, and I think it was partnered but sensation solo,
Mm-hmm.
where I was doing play piercings on myself
Mm-hmm.
as well as on the other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was experiencing the pleasant, intended, desired, altered states during. Good. All right. But I'm topping in this, right? And so the person got aftercare, and then God, this was years ago because it was a Toyota Tercel. Which car was it? It's not the current car. I remember crossing the Bay Bridge late night from Oakland to San Francisco, and I suddenly had this sensation like I was having a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
I was in my late 20s, nothing indicated, slightly higher cholesterol, eat too much junk food. Uh, but I thought I was having a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
I realized afterwards that I didn't give myself an opportunity to come down. And I'm not all that woo, But what I was experiencing was sensations in my body where I had put temporary piercing in the other person. I was
Mm,
having a delayed sympathetic sensation in the middle of driving on the Bay Bridge.
yeah,
And I'm also in an altered state, although I didn't necessarily recognize it. I would think I was just like, I'm happy. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that would be a scary moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm
Hmm.
like clutching my chest and wondering what the hell's going on.
Yeah. Not fun at all. Yeah, and that delayed sympathetic reaction is really interesting. And I want to think more about the delayed autosympathetic reaction of doing things on yourself and then not necessarily experiencing the sensation until later.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or the emotional impact. We do have a question.
Hmm.
Um, and they say, how can we start exploring solo play and building that foundation of trust with the self and our own needs when there is that fear of having done self-harm in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that I relate to very much because, so full disclosure, I'm very open about my mental health history. I am someone who was treated for years for borderline personality disorder, which led to me engaging in self-harm practices. Um, Getting into BDSM and kink is one of the things that really helps me regulate and ground and sort of shift certain energies, not to get too woo. But one thing you can do if you want to really be mindful about slipping into self-harm, given a history, is plan, really plan. Write your scenes out. Think about them and write them out not the same day that you do them. Have that buffer period where you can process, like, do I want to do this? Really think about what you're going to do in the scene and also negotiate a role for yourself. Because there's a lot of binaries in kink and BDSM. There's tops and bottoms. There's masters and slaves. There's dominants and submissives, right? Sadists and masochists. Think about what role cognitively you want to put yourself in. There's a big difference between auto-sadism, which is enjoying the inflicting of the sensation, versus auto-masochism, which is the enjoying of having the sensation inflicted by you. Right? And I don't know if y'all have ever seen the duck rabbit image. Do you know the duck rabbit? Yeah. I think I have one. Can I share it on my screen real quick just to give the visual? Cool. So like, that's a duck rabbit, right? You can look at it, you can see a duck, you can see a rabbit, but what you likely can't do is see both at the same time because that'll short you out. Because in order to see this both as a duck and as a rabbit, you have to see that eye as pointing to the left and hence not the right, and as pointing to the right and not the left at the same time. You can't do that, right? So, but you can flip-flop between the two. So when you're like thinking about, do I want to get into auto sadist mindset or do I want to get into auto masochist mindset? You can't do both. It'll be a cognitive overload. And even if you can do both, you'll get more out of doing one or the other, right? When I'm flogging, am I putting myself in the top mindset or in the bottom mindset? Am I experiencing being flogged or am I experiencing flogging, like doing the flogging? Right? So I think really being intentional about this can help you frame the space, right, to let you honestly go into what you're doing. And then you really want to practice radical self-honesty. Have red conditions, right? If there's blood, you're done. Make a commitment to yourself that if there's red, you're done, right? Unless you want blood, in which case you do. Be mindful, negotiate, think about what you're doing, think about what role that's playing in the scene. Is this frustrating my interest? Or is this conducive to my interests? Mm-hmm.
I like the bit about planning it in advance and understanding what role one's playing. There's a comment on the side. Thanks for having this. They have to blow out early, but looking forward to watching the rest. This is being recorded, so you will be able to see it, folks, in the series and the page of the Consent Dojo. The person said they don't even do self-play, but the self-consent conversation has given me a lot to think about. Love
Yeah,
it.
I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah, the self-commitment aspect, I think, ap- applies to solo, pair, or cast of thousands.
Yeah, yeah. And do we have time for a moment? Because we were just talking about roles and everything, and I got thinking about the dominant submissive distinction in solo play, because that one is a little trickier, but one of the most fun, right? So how can you have in kink spaces, we'll write it capital D / lowercase s, dominant submissive. How can you have a DS relationship or dynamic with you if you're the only one? How can you be both a dominant and submissive of yourself? Well, answer, you don't try. Pick one. Or you can think of when you're writing out the scene, when you're coming up with the narrative, and you want to make yourself submit during that scene, that is present you dominating future you, and future you submitting to present you. Right? So it's a cross time solo domination and submission. Again, there's two parties, but they're both you. Right? And then also, let's say you're a submissive, you don't have a dominant anywhere. There are ways of practicing submission with no dominant. So in the art world, people sometimes talk about aleatoric art. John Cage was big on this. Aleatoric art being art that has an element of chance. Aleatoric BDSM, pre-planned. So here are 3 scenes that I've done. No, 2 that I've done and 1 that I've considered that are solo submission to chance. One is very easy. Just make a playlist and put it on shuffle and have different songs correlate with different activities. During this song, I will do this. During that song, I will do that. Maybe have more songs than we'll play in the scene, and then just hit shuffle and go. And you submit to the will of the playlist. Another one that I did, which is super fun, is I used a tarot deck. And what I did with the tarot deck was I had 4 tables of implements: impact, tattooing, electricity, and knives. And I would draw 4 cards, and each suit corresponded to a type of implement. And the value was how long I would spend with that implement. And then I would draw one of the major arcana, and that would tell me what my intention for the scene was going to be. So this was a submission to the tarot. And another one that I haven't done yet because I've been nervous about it, I'd actually love to get your feedback on it, because it raises a tricky question about consent, which is why I haven't done it yet. I've thought about doing a scene in public where certain activities are triggered by environmental conditions. Like anytime someone goes in that bathroom door, I have to use this toy until they come back out. Now, the worry about consent there is this roping the other person into my scene in a manner that isn't negotiated? And I haven't been able to figure that one out yet.
Must it be other people in the environment?
No, but since they move on their own more than chairs, it's easier, right? But it could also be when the air conditioning kicks on.
So what was that term about performance that involves chance?
Aleatoric. Yeah, I'll try to spell it.
Yeah, because it
Google
occurred to me that on my art side, on my
Mhm.
art career side, especially in my social practice, I include a lot of that. But
Yeah.
um, there's and I promise this will connect.
Mhm.
In the first summer of the pandemic, I got to be part of an online performance barrage and it was a 6-hour durational performance. So there were like 100 of us doing separate individual 6-hour performances. Some
Wow.
people went shorter. I went for the full 6 hours. And it is in my art site, folks, so check it out. The piece is called Damn Spot. And I set up on my sink, I set up the camera. It was like a tower of computers. Set up the camera so it was looking straight down at the sink, and bar of soap, brand new giant bar of soap. And over the 6-hour period, I was playing the local NPR station. Anytime they mentioned COVID, I would wash my hair, wash my hand while they were talking about COVID. And then I would stop because they were talking about sports. But then soon enough, sports turned into, well, the Giants can't play because COVID.
Yeah.
So over a period of 6 hours, I washed my hands, and it was reflecting the anxiety, cultural anxiety. So the entire video was either me washing or not washing my hand, and the soap getting smaller and smaller. So the element of chance was talking about COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's a really cool piece. My research back when I was a full-time professor was all in philosophy of art and aesthetics. So yeah, we need to connect. Yeah, so that piece, I would have written about that piece because that's cool.
It was interesting to dive into the personal and cultural anxiety, because at that point I was alone in the house. My wife was away taking care of her mom. So I am sitting with not just my own bafflement and anxiety, but also this cultural anxiety. Now, okay, so that was it had a really interesting effect of being an exorcism for myself, but also playing with the whole Lady Macbeth thing. So could the environmental cue be, if you know the environment, could it be something else? Like, well, play parties have playlists.
So yeah, that's returning to the playlist idea, but what playlist that you didn't necessarily curate. So it could be like whenever you would get creative, right? You'd want it'd be fun to come up with something that would be universally applicable no matter the playlist. Like a set of conditions, like when it'd be easier if you know music theory, right? So you could be like, when something is in this key, I do this. If you don't know music theory, you'd have to be more creative.
Or what about, say, identifying or presenting gender of the musician?
Yes. Now, with your piece, I'm thinking now about the similarities in the way we might describe a solo scene and the similarities you described your piece. So what do you think, like, solo performance art, solo scene, clearly not a binary, clearly there's a spectrum, right? But with that piece, I could see someone doing exactly what you described as a solo kink scene, right? But it doesn't sound like it was that for you in that time.
No, and many of my performances are durational and endurance performances. And I will often, and if I'm performing with another performer, or working with a subject of a photograph, I will tell them that I am far harder and harsher as an art director or a lead creative than I am in topping in kink. And I require a lot more resiliency and toughness, because in the art capacity, I am full top.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing endurance performances, and I am often solo in that. Actually, there is a lot of similarity.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot of similarity. There was one called hodoku, which is a Japanese word both for unravel as well as to resolve an equation. I was in character and had a temporary tongue piercing that's like 6 inches connected to a ribbon that went out of my tongue and then in around this container, the lotus shaped thing wrapped around, and then it went out to the audience. And the audience pulling would spin the piece, and I had a stop point in my finger so it won't rip my tongue out. But there was definitely chance. I had to have my mindset clear, and I also had this most interesting sensation of, and in terms of external chemistry, I am sober. I am hardly sober by neurology. I had
I like that distinction.
Yeah, I experienced the sensation of my body melting like a sandcastle, and I could feel as the audience was coming in, there's this like wrapped orb on the stage, and I could feel people walking across my entity. Yeah, and it was actually, I did have an art reviewer ask me, why do you keep creating these difficult situations for yourself?
Yeah, you are. I mean, I won't psychologize you, but there's the answers there could be really, really revealing. Right? Now, you mentioned sobriety, and that's something that I think is important to mention here in the context of solo play too. I will not solo play on any substance. I won't do any kink on any substance, right? Substances can really, really compromise your ability to self-consent. Right? And I also have something that I like to call the mushroom rule. So one night I had a scene planned, but on the drive to the place where I was doing it, I got in an argument with a partner. And when I got there to set up my gear, my energy was bad. And I knew this is not going to go well for me. So I canceled my scene. The reason I call it the mushroom rule is the wisdom with mushrooms is you don't take them if you're in a bad mood, because the experience will amplify that bad mood. So the sort of somewhat jokey, but also I think still pretty serious rule is, if you're not in a headspace where you would do mushrooms, don't do solo scene.
Somebody asked over here about what do you mean by barely sober by neurology? That was my phrasing, as opposed to external substance. What I meant by that is I was not, I didn't have alcohol, I didn't have any other stimulants or depressants, but for me, going into a performative state, and there is a clear, distinct consent, as well as stepping into character, leaving everything behind, where I'm heightening my own experience, which is very similar to the brain chemical high of extreme sports, as well as performance, as well as kink. So that's what I mean by my self-generated neurological high. Yeah. Somebody mentioned it was at subspace or top space. For me, in the performance of hodoku or any of my performance, it is neither. It is neither subspace nor top space. I think the attachment to the term subspace or top space or top drop, I think necessarily clings to the binary, simply altered state.
Yeah.
Right? So simply an altered state. And I think for me in the performative, it is more akin to other, well, it's very similar to ordeals, like rituals of ordeals, but also extreme sports.
Mm-hmm.
So being right on that, speaking of edge play, being right on that edge of being my own art director at the same time that I am also relying on chance to create the work.
Yeah. You know, this overlaps with, this is like a whole other can of worms of stuff that I'm interested in, which is, you know, the way you're describing ordeals and this overcoming and this striving. So I'm, you know, in terms of orientation and identity, I'm asexual, also celibate, but a kinkster, right? So for me, it's not a sexual activity at all. I see it as an extension of my yoga practice, an extension of my mindfulness practice, and a form of gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
But not a gameplay like where you're trying to win, but a gameplay where you are adopting obstacles for the sake of the activity that they make possible, namely overcoming them. Sort of like mountain climbing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sort of like rock climbing. Like these are struggles, these are strivings, these are, I mean, if you want to get to the top of a mountain, you could just take a helicopter, but don't. You embrace arbitrary obstacles so that you can have that struggle.
Do you know that I just came back from summiting Mount Whitney? My second attempt at summiting Mount Whitney, which is the highest mountain in the lower 48. And last week, I summited Mount Whitney, where I got sunburned.
Yeah.
And that was an ordeal that I willingly created. Now, this is very interesting because I was not expecting an intersection between solo play consent and performance art and self-consent in putting myself in position of risk. I performed in situations where I can neither see, I can hear, but I can't see, and I can barely breathe, and I am trusting in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And several ordeals. So I wasn't expecting this overlap, and I'm delighted. In terms of ordeals, also with DS, and I think it overlaps with DS scenes as well as solo play, as well as particular kind of, uh, Bob Flanagan and Abramovich come to mind.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I was thinking of Abramovich earlier. Mm-hmm.
Abramovich, Bob Flanagan, Ron Athey,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, performances where ordeal, the striving to ordeal. And here we are in a post-industrial capitalistic culture in which an awkward leaning to secular and evangelism,
Yeah.
um, ultra right-wing religion, and a relatively new country that lacks um, rite of passage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So is it possible that in this culture, because I'm originally from Japan, and let me tell you, there's some rite of passage stuff there. Oy. Um, is it possible that we create these liminal moments of transitions for ourselves and ordeals as a way by, I don't know, something. I'm thinking out loud here.
Yeah, I think so. Because when I think back to when I do solo scenes, they're usually punctuation marks in my life.
Mm-hmm.
They're to mark significant situations, transitions. Um, the same thing with performances I've done.
Mm-hmm.
And this has me thinking, not to introduce another binary, right? So I'll just say this is spectral
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning, but I'm thinking when we do a solo scene, that's maybe for self-understanding and growth.
Mm-hmm.
When we do a performance, that is more for communicating outward. Like when we do, like if we do an artistic performance, we're trying to tell our audience something.
Mm-hmm.
When we're doing a solo scene that's more inward, we're trying to ask ourselves something and find the answer.
Ah,
And I grant there can be a little bit of both, but what do you think about that?
yeah, that's feeling right.
Yeah.
Um, I've got a performance kimono to what we wear, which, by the way, for those of you in the Bay Area, I have an I'm part of an art opening this Saturday, October 8th, at the Kearney Street Workshop that shows this work, where my performance is expressing a deep internal frustration around Orientalism and misogyny, as well as facing the layers of internalized identity that I have allowed, and trying to figure out which is my identity and which is a performance of an accepted sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and I am, to anyone who consents to seeing my performance, they're going to have an uncomfortable experience because I'm sharing it with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
You know, this is making me want to perform because it's been a minute, but I'm feeling
It,
that itch now.
it is exhilarating and terrifying. We have a question here.
Mhm.
Do you have advice or experiences tapping out or calling red from altered headspace? Then they continue. I feel like when we get far into it, it's hard to stop unless something dramatic or sudden happens, or a rule we put is breached. But the reality is more unexpected.
Absolutely. So, and this is a struggle even in partnered play, but more so in solo play, because in partnered play, there's at least the check and balance of having someone else in there with you. So if you're pushing further than you wanted to, they can pump the brakes. But with solo play, it's very easy to get carried away. So the advice I have there is definitely set those red conditions.
Mhm.
And that way it's kind of the scene calling red on you rather than you having to call red yourself, because you might not be in that state. And really have a spotter. If you want to do a pretty intense solo scene at home and you have a friend who you trust and who, has been invited into this part of your life, maybe invite them over to be a spotter so that you don't get carried away and that they can call red and that they can pump the brakes for you. You'll want to negotiate with them the way that they do that, right? I also really recommend doing some real self-reflection before going into a solo scene, like the weeks before, right? Like if you want to do a habitual solo scene practice, I recommend doing some meditative practices. I'll just describe two. One is an inner yes, inner no meditation, where you find a comfortable, sustainable position, and then you focus on your breath, drop into your body, and repeat something to yourself that you know is true. Today is Tuesday. My name is Lee. 1 + 1 = 2. Whatever, something that you know is true. And notice how your body responds to that truth. And then practice it with a falsehood, but say the falsehood as if it's true. Today is Wednesday. My name is Bob. 1 + 1 = 8. Notice how your body reacts. Where do you feel the falsehood? I tend to feel it around my eyes. And I'm not saying you can turn yourself into a magic 8-ball here, but you can start to learn what a yes and what a no feels like. And another thing you can do is there's a version of an eating meditation where you hold the food. This can be incorporated into a longer sequence. You hold it close to your nose and mouth, and you really smell it, and you check in with yourself and ask, do I actually have any desire to taste this? And really notice that, and notice what that desire feels like. Or you can call to mind something really icky and notice how your body reacts to the ick thought, and then call to mind something really appealing and notice how your mind reacts to the appealing thought. And all these are different ways, practices of learning bodily responses to things that you want and things that you don't on a visceral level. That can really help you in these situations.
Would you consider this a fun assignment for our viewers?
I think that would be really cool. Either of those. And I'll throw another one in that's a callback to something that we were talking about earlier, which is the shifting between sort of top and bottom mindsets, or even switching between auto-sadist and auto-masochist mindsets. So there's this technique that fancy people call sensate focus. In some traditions, it's very similar to what Dr. Betty Martin, who is amazing, sort of innovator of the Wheel of Consent, which is a fantastic program, she calls it waking the hands, getting it from older wisdom traditions. And it's a sort of mindful focus on the touch, right? It's a sort of exploration of touch for the sake of touch. But one thing you can do is, set a timer, 3 minutes, and touch, noticing what it feels like to be touched by you. Try to focus, send your mind to that sensation. What does it feel like to be touched by me in this way? And then do the same touch and shift headspace to, what does it feel like to touch me in this way? Because those are different. Focusing on the sensation of the person doing the touching and the sensation as the person receiving the touch, even when it's you doing both, it's a different frame. It's going to be a different interpretation. So maybe this is a fun homework assignment. Set aside 10 minutes and maybe do 3 focusing in one way, 3 the other way, take a little break, and then maybe do 3 minutes where you try to flip-flop. You try to alternate between both.
This sounds like a good homework when one is consensually trapped in a boring situation, like waiting for my flight, stuck in a plane, waiting for my doctor's appointment, where it's kind of low stakes. I'm not driving a car, but I'm just waiting. Or in a meeting at work, somebody said, well, you better not be giving the report or the next presentation, because you'd be like, huh? Right. End of quarter. What report did you want?
I have definitely been there.
We have 7 minutes left. Yeah. It has been a delight, and discovering that we actually have art in common. We must talk, and gaming in common. We must talk. And I would love to hear in the chat comments, and particularly for those of you who are viewing live, what are you going to remember? One thing that you're going to make sure to take away from your time with us? And let me read for you, Lee, what's coming up on the side here. I've recently tried doming in my everyday life with praise. So we gently guide bad behavior when they happen, really praise when good behavior. Talking to myself like I would want a partner or dom to helps a lot with body and gender issues and negative self-talk for me. Also with being patient with myself too. It's really hard on bad days, but so nice on the daily. And somebody else, thanks so much. Another, yes, thank you. Another, I'm the best top I've ever had.
Yes.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on Consent Dojo.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an honor, And I saw the mention of gender issues. So that's something I think about a lot. As a trans woman who has no desire to pass at all, and who works with a lot of trans people in mental health, my own experience, solo play has been a big part of my reclamation of my own body, and a big part of my reframing my body as mine, which has been really powerful. Really, it's another one of those things that it's not therapy, but it is deeply therapeutic.
Beautiful. Another says, I realize it makes sense to prepare and visualize for performances, but I need to apply this more to self-play. Sounds like this person is also a performer.
Mhm.
We should, without all of our guests here, um, confer and talk
Yeah.
art and performance and kink. You are entirely fascinating.
Oh, well, thank you. Mhm.
So
Oh,
let's walk. Yeah.
yeah. And so I have some other stuff coming up.
Ooh, yes, do
Um,
tell us.
if anyone here wants to come, so I host on the first and third Wednesday of every month. I host a queer mindfulness hour for folks who want to come together and practice mindfulness and sort of drop in and discuss mindful coping strategies for stressors common to queer communities, and even talk a little bit about what it would be to queer the notion of mindfulness itself, which is pretty fascinating. What are you going to do on the other Wednesdays? Well, on the second and fourth, I offer mindfulness for kinksters. It's during the same time. These are both at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, which is my time. So what would that be? 5 p.m. Pacific? Yeah. And these are all advertised on my website, on my Instagram, basically everywhere. And tomorrow actually is a queer mindfulness meeting. But I'm also in conjunction with the Moan app. I'm halfway through a 4-part series on Buddhism and BDSM. And tomorrow, our discussion, which is at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, is on Buddhism, bondage, and liberation, and how bondage can be a tool toward liberation. And the week after that, the final week will be on how you can be a Buddhist and sort of existentially sort of trying to eliminate suffering and also be a sadomasochist. So if you're interested in any of those topics, check out my stuff in the chat, and yeah, email me
Yeah.
with any questions and stop on by.
And another says, I'll definitely be chewing on the intersection of kink and yoga practice as a yoga instructor as well, but also having a lot of thought on self-harm versus self-care aspect, which for me is uh, ringing some harm reduction bells. Definitely appreciate this catalyst for all the considerations. Now, you had to bring up the Buddhist thing
Yeah.
because my background is from that Japanese Zen background. I
Mhm.
like to talk about Zen as Buddhism for killers
Mm.
because Zen was commonly practiced by the warrior class where
Yep.
they had no choice but when ordered to kill, and medieval Japan was nothing but suffering.
Mhm.
Of course, I did go to Zen summer camp and sat in meditation. If we fell asleep, they'd whack us on the back and we'd bow and thank them, and I somehow liked that.
Imagine that.
So thank you again, and thank you to the viewers. Please stick around just a sec before I wrap up the recording. Thank you, everyone. And for those of you who are viewing us later, please go out and practice your consent muscle because it is a daily practice in the small and the big ways. So thank you, and see you in another episode.